I mentioned briefly in yesterday's review that Turok 2 Seeds of Evil on the Game Boy Color occasionally strays into the run-and-gunner territory, whereby you find yourself pelting along, mowing down hordes of mutated dinosaurs with your rapid-fire machine gun. It didn't happen too often in that game, which favored a much more careful exploration mindset, but the tempo would get turned up, especially towards the end. That was the second of the 5 Game Boy Turoks to be released, and was very similar to the first in feel. Now, let's skip to the last one, the only one to come out on the Advance. Whereas the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube version of this game was a first-person shooter, we're sticking to the side-scrolling platform style from the earlier Game Boy ones, but what we have now is very much a Contra Metal Slug style run-and-gunner. There's no exploration needed this time around, no backtracking, just tons and tons of respawning enemies that are gonna require a heck ton of firepower to sort out. Unlike the earlier Game Boy versions, which usually had their own storyline, this one actually does follow the same plot as the console version. During the Old West days, a tribal chief called Talset witnessed his people being completely eradicated by one Captain Bruckner. Being the only survivor of the clan, he challenges the captain to a fight to the death. But somehow, it's not explained why, just go with it, a wormhole opens up and sucks them both in. They're transported to the Lost Land, a common location in the Turok comics from what I understand, which places evolution early in the timeline. It's actually a prequel to the first Turok game, Dinosaur Hunter, as it happens. Anyway, Talset nearly dies from the fall, but is rescued and nursed back to health by the people of the River Village. In thanks, your first port of call is to help them defend their village from these marauding reptilian humanoids known as the Slag. The story goes on from there. So yeah, it's a bit more simplistic as a concept, done with this idea of making sure the player never stops moving. You can't afford to. Grunts will pop out of holes in the ground that just appear from somewhere, who even knows, and while many can be taken out in one hit, others are real units that you'll have to stand and blast at for ages. Thankfully, you get a really nice arsenal to play with, from your standard blaster with infinite ammo, 3-way shots, a shotgun that's excellent for close range spread, rocket launchers, and a particularly useful flamethrower. There are many to choose from. Of course, it depends on what are available to find on the stages, and also on which character you choose. There are 2 playable characters and they each have their own unique melee weapon. You can play as the aforementioned Talset, who carries this tomahawk axe, or the meathead looking tribesman called Jun, who has this saw blade on a string thing that I can't really describe. It's definitely the more powerful of the 2 melee weapons, as you can rapidly fling it out, but also by holding the button you can charge it up and slice your way through multiple enemies. If that all sounds a bit brutal, it's because it is. This game has the distinction of being rated T for teen, which is perhaps a little unusual for a Game Boy game. There's loads of blood, bodies get lit on fire, it's all rather gory in a way that might seem commonplace nowadays, but you didn't see all that often on Game Boy. It's done well though, and definitely fits the frenetic pace of the game. Other than the melee weapons, there's not a great deal of difference between the characters. Jun has a slightly larger HP bar, and Talset has like maybe a 10th better jumping speed and distance. It's never really a factor. I guess it really just comes down to whether you prefer the axe or the chainsaw yo-yo thing. Plus, you can actually use Jun's weapon as a grappling hook to climb stuff, although it's not needed that often. There are 2 game modes, Normal and Pro. Normal is plenty hard enough though, so don't feel bad for choosing it. Like I say, enemies often respawn, but it's usually only the ones that die in one hit, and they only respawn 3 or 4 times, not indefinitely, so that's good. The monsters that take a bunch of hits to kill may seem really tricky at first, but you can often stun lock them in place, and they'll usually be more easily taken out with a stronger weapon. Now we have the shoulder buttons to use, flicking between stuff in your arsenal is way easier, unlike before where you had to hold down select and then do left and right. Scattered across the levels are these dream catchers. These add a little bit of armor next to your HP bar. Also on the level are stars, which allow you to summon this water spirit to attack everything on screen. You'll see health pickups every now and then, the problem being that they're too rare and often in places where you'll end up taking damage by trying to get to them. And that's really the standout issue with Turok Evolution. The game demands a lot from you through its constant onslaught, but doesn't really give all that much back in the way of rewards. It's pretty sadistic sadistic, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, you certainly don't want these types of games to be too easy, but every time you die, you have to restart the level. Think back to Contra, a staple of this sort of game, or Operation C for a Game Boy example. Obviously, you'd do your damnedest not to lose a life, as you'd lose your weapon upgrade, but if you did, your next guy would come in and take over from the same spot. Evolution takes the opposite tack. You keep whatever weapons and ammo you found, but you have to begin the level again. Some might like that approach, but for me it's preferable to let the player carry on from where they fell. I'm also not super keen on the password system. A battery save would have been ideal, or if you insist on using passwords, make them easier. Here you've got multi-segmented passwords. The level you want to play is just the last 4 characters, but you've got to put in all this other stuff beforehand, which tells the game how much ammo and so on you've got. A bit unnecessary, especially considering this is a handheld game meant to be portable. Try entering a 14-digit password while you're sat in the back seat of a moving car and you'll see what I mean. All that being said, there's a lot to like with Turok Evolution. You'll still get these really tricky stages that don't seem to fit in. The first boss is this odd, on-rails shooter thing that I really do not like at all. It seemed Acclaim had a thing about adding unnecessary distractions in between levels in their Game Boy Turok games, if you recall the weird auto-scrollers from Seeds of Evil. But the graphics are vibrant in all their gory excellence, the soundtrack is a bit of a banger actually, and the effects to go with it are superb. Very, very hard. Almost unforgiving hard, but some people like that, don't they? I think I prefer the approach taken in the first couple of games, but this is still pretty good.